I imagine you'll probably want to start with a poem, won't you?
I didn't have anything in mind, but...
Well, luckily.
Well, that's... Well, or not, yes. Request?
LV, I reckon.
Oh, okay. Very lovely. Okey-doke, LV. The luncheon voucher years. The bus pass and digitised medical record always in the inside pocket come later, along with the constant orientation to the nearest hospital. The years of sir, long past mate, much less dearie, of invisibility, of woozy pacifism, of the preemptive smile of the hard of hearing, of stiff joints and the small pains that will do me in. The ninth complement of fresh, stale cells. The late middle years, say 1400 AD on the geological calendar. The years of the incalculable spreading middle. The years of speculatively counting down from an unknown terminus. Because the whole long stack, shale, vertebrae, pancakes, platelets, plates, won't balance anymore, and doesn't correspond anyway to the thing behind the eyes that says I, and feels uncertain, green and treble, and wants its kilt as it climbs up to the lectern to blush and read, "Thou didst not abhor the Virgin's womb." The years of taking the stairs 2 at a time, though not at weekends. A bizarre debt to Dino Buzzati's Tartar step. The years of a deliberate lightness of tread, perceived as a nod to Franz Josef, thinking with his knees and rubber-tired Viennese fiacre. The years when the dead are starting to stack up. The years of incuriosity and novarum rerum incupidissimus. The years of cheap acquisition and irresponsible postponement, or cheap postponement and irresponsible acquisition. Of listlessness, of miniaturism, of irascibility, of being soft on myself, of being hard on myself, and neither knowing nor especially caring which. The years of rereading at arm's length. The fiercely objected to professional years, the appalling indulgent years, the years of no challenge and comfort zone and safely within my borders. The years of no impressions and little memory, the years of I would prefer not and leave me in the cabbage. The years of standing in elevators under the elevator lights and the elevator mirror, feeling and looking like leathered frizz, an old cheese-topped dish under an infrared hot plate, before they kindly took out the lights and took out the mirror and slipped in screens for news, weather and sponsors' handy messages. The years of one over the thirst and another one over the hunger, of insomnia and sleeping in, of creases and pouches and heaviness, and the barber offering to trim my eyebrows. The years of the unbeautiful corpse in preparation, the years to choose, silt or flambe.
I think we're probably all quite glad you're back, to be honest. I think, there's so many things we could talk about, but one of the things I wanted to maybe start by talking about, because it runs through the book, is this idea of place, and something that Mark Forward, who may or may not be here, there's a lot of people, once said in an essay about you, to do with your London, that we often come to know you in poems through the places that you're talking about, that you describe. And so I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about your places and the places that are in this book, and the kind of freshness of vision.
Though, not there. There's the only place there, I think, is the elevator.
Oh no, of course, that runs through.
But curious, but you're right. I am kind of naked without my place.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. Is there anything about Florida in there? Probably not. I don't know that there is, but
no, it's more Australia.
I was finding it hard to I needed to be taken out of my life in order to write anything. And the time when a sort of disproportionate number of these poems were written is when I was in Australia for 2 or 3 months, and I must have written all of, 4 poems or something. And it made me think I should become someone's sponsored astronaut or something like that, and kind of orbit the Earth, because then I would write lots, I'm sure. But being sort of within my own life had something want to say, inhibiting or styptic. But that said, I wrote about Australia and a bit about here. Oddly, this is also sort of function of age. You remember your childhood, so I went back to Edinburgh, where I sort of grew up for most of my childhood, and quite a lot of poems about Edinburgh in here as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, with that, it's something that seems to have run through a lot of your books. There's some of the early poems about London, for example, when you first are in London and making that your, this sort of novelty, that almost an innocence, I think, when you are in a new place, you have to, I think you said somewhere that the only thing you have at that point is your identity. That's kind of the stable thing, and everything else you have to build again, And I think, I mean, something that perhaps might be clear in is one of your poems, like, say, Valet or the Bundaberg poem, possibly, that you might want to share with
love to read
the audience.
Thank you. Love to read the Bundaberg poem. But in a way, the places it becomes a kind of encrustation, and you're something that sort of started off soft with your identity, and you look around you after a few decades, and you've made a sort of exoskeleton of place, if you like. A lot of these Australian poems are kind of suspiciously happy or really kind of joyous.
Well, we can see about that.
Well, they let me sell you a pup. For some reason, I wanted to give it a Spanish title, so it's called Recuerdos de Bundaberg, and it has an epigraph from Robin Hitchcock. No, I don't remember Guildford. And it's this. I think this. I remember writing this, and I wasn't in Australia anymore. But I sort of had it felt strange to have been there. Did I fly there? I may have flown there. Maybe in something with the specifications of a crop duster. The Sugar Coast. Everything comes with a name and a nickname. The Soaked Coast, Bundy. Blue Russell of Cane. Home to Rum City Wrecking. Farewell Bundaberg, home of bricks. Big Daddy's Pies, Air Force One. And the nature. Grass trees, wedding bushes, acid frogs, termite nests. Beaded or bearded dragons. Together or separately, I don't remember. I saw one though. It was huge in some undergrowth. Harmless probably, but ferociously ugly. I left the workshop in the Rotary Club. I took the Bra Challenge, or did not take the Bra Challenge. I headed down Bourbon Street, towards the Bennett or the Burnett. The sources are unclear. One of those short, catastrophic Australian rivers. The old bones of sugar refineries. The pocked mud glistening with thousands of alert little mud crabs. The farmers came in to buy dry goods and do their banking and get soaked. The mercantile brick paving, awnings, shade and a gentle breeze. Horace would have appreciated it. Amonos, I can hear him saying. The 20th century, the Wild East. I occupied an array of public benches. Hours went by. Chinese tourists mooched disconsolately down the pavements, sol or sombra to taste. The Mediterranean social life of lorikeets, the inverted magpies, the golden basket, the golden casket, the golden gasket, 3 for the price of 4. Bundaberg, somewhere I'd no reason to be, anywheresville, as in miles from. No dot on a Marconi graph, semicolon, on no radar, a single ping. Or if there was, then just a ping singing to itself.
I think, I mean, in that poem's a perfect example of something I wanted to talk to you about more generally, if that's all right. Now we're here. Something that you talked about in your introduction to the Gottfried Benn translations, where you talked about a kind of murmurousness in poems that you're drawn to. And I think so much of the poems here, but also that you've written in translation or in your own books, have been to do with sort of the quality of voice and speech and those kind of things. It seems that that's been a common factor. And again, I think you said in the Ben that he'd added a certain musicality, perhaps, a kind of fluidity to your diction. I just wondered if we could talk a bit about speech in your poems, you know, or vocal quality, as you put it somewhere.
Yeah, no, he's. There are various kinds of poems, but Ben had this concept of the monological poem, the poem monologue, and another translation, as Declan suggests, from Dorst Grünbein, my Dorst Grünbein translations a few years back. He has a sequence called Monologische Gedichte, monological poems. It gives to provide a very intimate experience for the reader. The reader is practically inside your head. The reader hears you clear your throat, and the reader sort of sees what's coming next. It's a poetry of intimacy, and ideally, really, also a poetry that doesn't that's not confessional, that doesn't tell you anything much particularly. It's not about. It doesn't have to be about anything. I love that idea of getting the engine that runs on water, that would be my aim. I mean, another name you could mention in this context would be James Schuyler, the American poet, who again has this. I think the technology is called Kunstkopf, sort of audio thing where you see the signal, feel the signals crossing your brain. It's that sort of poem that I'd like.
Yeah, I mean, sort of building exactly on that Schuyler, the piece you wrote in Where Have You Been, where you said that and again, I think you said it in another context about Lowell, this idea that they're not building these monumental poems, they're doing something different. It's more about a momentary thing, and again, it is to do with that quality of voice, perhaps. But
I mean, I love the idea of these empty. I mean, these poems are stuffed, but at the same time, there isn't really any real drama, and I've sort of had it with drama, and I've been dramatic, and I didn't want to be dramatic anymore, and maybe this is my sort of conversion from cannibalism to vegetarianism or something.
There's a few meat slices in here somewhere. And just to sort of build on the idea of voice and musicality, I mean, some of these poems seem enhancedly musical, perhaps. I think certainly, there are lines that sing out, and there's a sort of out of context, but you mentioned sort of Tennyson at one point. I don't know, not that we're going down the Tennyson hole, but there seems to be an enhanced musicality, perhaps, and a sort of a dandyishness that, I mean, you've talked about and you've done it in other poems, throughout, but there feels to be that sense of putting on a show at times, a tap dance, maybe.
These are things I had an absolute horror of. I mean, I hated the idea of things sounding nice or being contrived to sound nice when I began. But that's the thing about poetry is that, or can be, that your positions change and you sort of revolve very slowly on your own axis until you're facing exactly the other way. And so I love the idea initially of language that doesn't draw attention to itself, that's sort of plain, utilitarian, and sort of laid out in sort of blocky things. I'm divided between things that, I mean, sentences that kind of go on forever and sentences that barely begin. I mean, with lots of sort of one or two word sentences, lots of little bits. Musicality possibly from Latin. I mean, both poems I read have sort of little tags of Latin in them. I guess Latin is experiencing a comeback in here.
Okay. Well, it's good. It's
Latin is half of English, and it's. I mean, if English people don't study Latin, they threaten to lose half their language. And that brings me to this dandy-ish idea. I mean, English also has all these words, has this sort of famously large vocabulary. So, use them.
Yeah,
use a few.
And I mean, I think to build on the mention of the Latin, I mean, do you think that might partly have come back into fashion in your own life because of your work with the translations, that you've always had to think about which registers, which vocabularies to build on?
Well, that's interesting, yeah. I mean, when I thank the London Review's Jeremy Harding, I say for a conversation he won't remember, but we were talking about, my own sort of having, being drained of words from translating many novels mostly, but having this sort of Nietzschean idea that whatever doesn't kill me is going to make me stronger, and I like the idea of thinking of if I've survived all these translations, it leaves me with almost more words, more tones, more resources, sort of than I kind of know how to do with, and that it's somebody who if you do that, you're going to make yourself into something unlike a sort of in German you'd say 0815, a sort of normal, ordinary, sublunary poet. You're going to be a sort of superlunary poet, something.
I think it's probably time for another poem. Could you read Derek, please, as a request?
Yeah. Glad to oblige.
Which I think was in the LRB, wasn't it?
It was.
Yep. On brand. Yeah.
Derek. That rather sprawling four-square spelling, always in my mind half associated with a hirsute 14-year-old I saw in the newspaper who sued his local education authority to keep his beard out of a sort of medical necessity. My neighbour took up residence next to this youth in my head, Derek. Clean-shaven, Welsh, heavy-set, lugubrious, his steel grey hair apparently parted by a steel comb. Tracksuit bottoms, graphite racket, retired from something or other, maybe ex-army. A plangent sonorousness. If I have it right, India. A grandfather in spe, then fact. He was shy, I was shy. At the height of things, he fed me clippings from the Telegraph, and we talked about militaria. I was translating Ernst Jünger, though not in time for him. Some villagey gene had given him the atavistic habit of standing outside his front door for hours, arms crossed, surveying the scene. Perhaps a swagger stick to take the parade. He knew the street as I didn't know him. Spent years setting plants and persecuting graffiti in a tiny doggy flower bed under the railway bridge. Played tennis on the corporation courts. Kept an ear open for the local scuttlebutt. Like a hardy perennial, he stood there under his wife's hollyhocks, now both under the ground. Massive heart attack, he. Years of chemotherapy at the Royal Free and Easy, she. Buried from St. Dominic's down the road. The orphaned court, the problematic flower bed improbably flowering. The neighbours shuffling past, the hollyhocks, pink. More local connections than I'll ever have. That's my... sad poem about the man who used to live next door.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to mention Alfred calling Lark, but I mean, he didn't live next door. But there's a quality of that to it, I think. But I sort of wanted to build on something you said in your introduction to the new W.S. Graham selected that you recently did, where you said about some of his poems. He sort of pretended that the ones that bring a tear to the eye aren't better, but they kind of are. So I sort of wondered if we could do a little subcommittee about emotion in poems, which I know you've mentioned a few times in relation to Pound and things. And a poem like that, there's a lot of feeling and emotion in that, and that's always been a factor in poems that you've written, but also people that you've loved, like Lowell. And wondered if we could maybe touch on that, perhaps.
I mean, I don't really know what emotion comes from, where emotion is generated, because they're often sort of tiny things or chance relationships, or it's not. They're not. This is Ben again. They're not sort of polystrophic rhymed addresses to spouses. I mean, you get that, and they may even turn out all right. But in a way, you're likelier to write something interesting or unhackneyed or something about somebody who brushes. It's probably hard to write something sort of feelingful about a central connection. I think I don't know. I rather dread it. But yeah.
There's I guess there's that enhanced responsibility perhaps as well. You feel, again, we were talking about Ian Hamilton downstairs, but also you know, he's someone who's been important to you, and again that idea of responsibility in poems, particularly if they're personal poems or to do with writing out of life, which I mean I guess is you know, one of the other threads that have run through your books and that comes up again here, perhaps more obliquely, is you know, you've written poems about your father and your relationship with your father, and now it seems that, again, to draw on the Hamiltonian for a moment, he talked about how difficult and how much of a wrench it was, or how difficult it was in his life when he outlived his father, or he got to the age of his father, and how he almost had to start again in some ways. And it feels like this is, you know, being a more mature book, and more, you know, that's something you seem to have to reckon with in this book. And there are poems that perhaps don't expressly mention your father, but there seem to be in communication with the poems you did write about your father, perhaps. I wondered if that was still something that was a kind of a generative source, or if it's something that you feel is behind it.
It may do again, or it may present itself in a different way. But I mean, otherwise, you know, there is a sort of understanding that you make poems out of words as well, and that there's also something in the choosing and arranging of words that makes feeling, which is a sort of a strange and very complex and not understood process, not least of all by me. But it's so it's sort of dibble dabble with words, and as opposed to a sort of confronting a subject, say. So it's a different kind of writing, and that's where the compensations of music or diction or something, there isn't. They're not sort of big headlines, but I mean, to each, we all sort of follow our trajectories in different ways. And this is towards, I suppose, greater subtlety or something like that. Although it's, you don't sort of stop the traffic by announcing subtlety.
No, sure. But, perhaps you could read the Gottfried Benn poem that's in the book.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Not by him, but about him.
Mm-hmm. This is about a period when Ben was very young and in the German army in World. Well, she wasn't all that young. He was about 30. He was 30. It's called Gottfried Benn, circa 1916. But it's this sort of isolated and to me always sort of rather enviable period when he's behind the German lines in Belgium somewhere. And has almost nothing to do, and does it. Gottfried Benn, circa 1916. I'd rather speak it than write it, rather mutter it than speak it, disobliging, spiffy mutter that no one would understand. How a man, the thing stiffened, the rogue state familiarly engorged, bristling, crystalline, myrmidon formation, Schlieffenplan, Prussia, the North Korea of the age. 4 wars in 50 years, colonies in the Pacific, everywhere not nailed down in 1880. And our man, himself to himself, the run of 11 rooms, potters, if he cares to, not even Uniformpflicht, in pyjamas and cardigan, neither coward nor conchy, not stricken with disorder, disaffection, good fortune, or even medicine his sick note. Just immeasurable distance and froideur, an antipathy to concerted action and human history, beyond the dreams of Keaton or Trakel or Archimedes or Schweik. Smokes and thinks and writes, béguinage he calls it, in his personal monastery, behind the lines, in plucky little Belgium.
That behind the lines and the béguinage sort of brings the next thing up that I thought we might talk about. You've talked or written in pieces before about the idea of reading, and it comes up again in the first poem in here, the Lindsay Garbutt poem. This idea of rereading and the sort of the mulch, the osmosis of reading. And I just thought perhaps we could talk a little bit about that. The way that you talk about reading as a means of, it's more than just memory or something. It's a kind of internalizing a physical thing. I mean, have you added any more sort of hooks to your?
You make yourself out of what you read, it felt important to me to add more ingredients and not write out of the same 3 or 4 people I've been writing from for a long time. But I mean, you know who they are. It's Ben and Lowell and Montale, Brodsky, Schuyler. I don't know if I've added anyone. Yeah. But I mean, one looks, one kind of fishes. I mean, there's not a hook, but you hang your line in the water and wait and see if something comes along.
And you said that to talk about hanging on for things. Something I was reading in a piece the other day that you talked about. I mean, again, we've mentioned Hamilton already, and he was a great believer in the miraculous lyrical arrival. But there was some way that you said you felt in the period where you weren't writing poems or weren't writing many poems, that you felt like a gambler at the slot machine, sort of with your slim dime, not paying it in or something. I mean, how have the poems been for you generally? Do they tend to? Are you someone who sort of starts with a line or an image, or has it just been? There's been periods where you're writing and you leave it at that, and the voice.
No, I never. I mean, I've never made myself do anything. And the poems are poems. I mean, Lowell has this phrase, my 9th muse or whatever, my 10th muse, sloth.
Yeah.
It's really, it's time looking out of the window is really, really important. And perhaps I sort of failed to write because I wasn't looking out of as many windows as I would have liked. I was just translating all the time. But it's important to me to sort of find new things that will new writers that will drag you along, that will sort of mix you up, show you different approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean someone that you've written about for the LRB and that you're talking about tomorrow, I believe, Karen Soley seems to be someone whose work has really. You've been excited by that, and that's
true. That's really true. Yeah, I mean, I came across her when I was judging a contest, the Griffin in Canada, and I came across her first book, and I wanted to give a prize to her first book. I wasn't able to give a prize to her first book, but she was a keeper.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, in her there seems to be something. I think in the piece you mentioned it as well, but. In her work that you responded to, similar things that you responded to in the Les Murray poems, this velocity, this idea of moving and speed.
Murray too, Murray is another one. I mean, there are more people. I mean, one does make oneself up of more people. I should have said Les Murray, that's for sure.
Oh, he's implied.
Right, yeah.
But no,
absolutely.
I thought that was something we could touch on, because some of these poems, or lots of these poems in fact, they don't only move in place, as we spoke about earlier, but they travel quickly, I think. They kind of zip along, and it's not just the music. There is a velocity to these poems, I think.
Good.
And perhaps, yeah, I know.
Fast is good. Fast
yeah,
is good.
No, of course. But sort of conversely to that, you mentioned Montale a minute ago, and he's someone you spoke about recently at Oxford as well, isn't he? But I remember something you said that you liked the idea of writing motet poems and these. Sort of quiet, isolated poems, but there is one in here called Motet, isn't there?
There is one called Motet, and that was somewhere behind the name I gave the book, the One Lark, One Horse, and the motets for me are the short poems that that don't gather any moss. I mean unlike the others that get very shaggy.
Maybe you could read Motet for us.
I'll happily read Motet somewhere near the end. Motet. It's naphtha, now you're gone. The sudden apprehension of squalor. The unflowering cardamom plant, gummy with syrup and flies. Sour foot smell in the rumpled quilt. A wilted squadron of paper airplanes ready to take me after you. I mean, that's basically Ian Hamilton, isn't it?
Yeah, I
think that's.
It's fine,
Ian Hamilton. I mean,
it's adding one more to the collective, isn't it? No, he's in there, of course. But again, Montale. I mean, so now that we've got you back with this one, obviously we're hoping for more of this sort of thing. So, are there new poems emerging at the minute, or are you caught up with other things?
I really am. I'm afraid to say I really am, but I'll begin again with bits and pieces, and I feel quite perfectly sanguine about future product.
Okay, I'm not.
But thank you.
It's all right.
Thank you.
It's becoming a appraisal now. I'm concerned about it. But one of the other things that I thought we could.
I'm resting.
No, it's fine.
I'm resting.
You're not back at school till Monday. One of the things...
These things aren't easy to write.
No, it's fine. You're doing well. There was another thing I thought we might talk about, if you'd like to. Was this idea of forgetting. You kind of playfully talk about memory, but there's there are various takes on that in the book. But this idea of almost a sort of aphasia comes in, But again, I think it's it's linked to that idea of these different poets that you've as you said you sort of think in these poets and all that, and this idea of some notion of what becomes a different period of writing. And again, the Montale, that idea of motets, it feels like in some ways a different way. And that poem particularly about forgetting, which I hope maybe you could read in a minute. I just that felt like again a different note coming in, and not only in its music, but also in just this idea of, again, in LV, you mentioned this this sense of being almost a different person, the cells having regenerated. And I wondered if that was something that was actively sort of on your mind, this idea of, I'm writing poems as a different person or at a different stage.
Maybe that's the importance for me of being kind of lifted out of my life, because again, this was written in Chicago. I was in Chicago for 2 days. There was a conference about Bruno Schulz, who sort of figures into the poem just a little bit. But again, I mean, sometimes you these things insinuate themselves into your head, and they if you're lucky, there's a whole sort of concatenation of them, and you can kind of follow them along for a while. And that's sort of how that poem was. And it felt, I wrote it probably in a day or a couple of hours or something. And but it's such a very kind of beatific thing.
Perhaps you can
on forgetting. Typical. One of the things I forgot was the epigraph, which I had a certain amount of trouble getting introduced, because the source is rather long. It's called "Troubling Historic Broadsheet Advertisement," but it's written in small bold caps. But there's not really a word you could leave out of that. Troubling Historic Broadsheet Advertisement. And the actual epigraph itself is IQ of 145 and can't remember, ? Which, I mean, I guess some of you kind of remember or have some dim sense of. I mean, this sort of strangely blank-looking person in a V-neck sweater. I mean, that and the pregnant man are two absolutely haunting things from advertising from, I guess, the 70s or something. So this is a sort of stock taking of things that are not there, and it's all true, and these are my own words. Empiricism has been gone far more often than not. I think I originally learned it in my teens. Now I sometimes find it by alphabetizing, but most of the time it's gone and stays gone. I don't know if I dislike it because I can't remember it, or I can't remember it because I dislike it. It's as though it's on permanent loan somewhere, someone else's problem. I don't know what would alarm me, really alarm me. Galicia was gone, both Galicias. Boarding pass recently disappeared for a while. I keep a firm hold on ocarina and Hofmeister, eschewing Hofmann with 2 Fs and Hofmeister with 1 F. My other rejoices in the name Hofmeister with 2 Fs, and she's my master. I keep a firm hold on ocarina and Hofmeister, eschewing Hofmann and Hofmeister, that tacky 1980s lager, when German became respectable. I do Corona Corona and Corina Corina and La Coruña. That's the El Camino one. I walked 30 blocks the wrong way down Derision. The ordered numbers seemed to make no sense. I was unclear about Hamilton and Harrison. Weren't they presidents? If not, why not? Confound it, I didn't know which way was up or west. I hoped the post office might be a travelodge where I finally posted my letter. Abstemious was gone for years. Now I keep hold of it by tethering it to facetious. What if facetious goes? Imagine not knowing facetious. It would help to have a crocodile, a street of crocodiles. I was here yesterday and I lost a brown glove, says a loud voice in a bar, not mine, or not yet. Actually, it was a blue glove. I get my Magyars mixed up. Was it Zuza Rakowski or Agnes Nemes Nodge, A or Z? Deborah has displaced Dorothea, or was it vice versa? Now where are they? I disappear into my room to look for a book and emerge hours later with the wrong one, or with none at all. Tell me, is it singular universality or simple unavailability? Tiger-striped spectacles and a lazy eye. How about I come over and make you forget all about him? That's not me either. That's for something called Grubhub, over a 10,000 calorie picture of a la mode or Miracle Whip. There's comfort. Probably, come to think of it, the hymn would be Grubby Hubby. My spelling isn't what it was. I talk when I have the words. They are not always there when I talk. I'm not sure if that makes me long-winded or Delphic, perhaps both. I remember I wrote apotropaic. There you go.
Did you?
I remember I wrote apotropaically once. I wrote anamorphosis. I wrote aporia. It's 12, 12, 12. Rien ne va plus. About them Mayans. The Pope has tweeted assurance, or his astronomers have. Sweet comfort. Sweet tweet comfort. It's not La Coruña at all. It's Compostela. Ah, Stella. Stella or Vanessa, make a decision. The pilgrims with their scallop shells of quiet, their Jakobsmuscheln on their hats. Strange place for a shell, no? And that was written on the 12th of December. It's supposed to be one of the candidates for the end of the world. The 12th of December in 2012, and that's when the Pope got involved. It was okay. It was okay. Yeah.
A near miss, probably.
Probably.
We got through.
Yeah.
And just, to talk about that, and that poem is obviously so much to do with language and its use, and as well as the translations. You've written a lot of criticism and journalism, and you said in your collection of essays it's the sort of the red thread, or your kind of responsible writing. And I mean, and how much do you feel like that's become a part of the poems, almost a kind of adjunct to the poems, or do you see them as separate entirely?
I don't know. I mean, they're probably some way they're the sort of the enemy of the poems, probably. But in some way, I think they're sort of the poems by other means, or you know, I think whenever things get, you know, particularly fancy or showy or something, I think, my God, it's really too long since I've written a poem, and I shouldn't be sort of, there shouldn't be this sort of plumage in a book review.
I mean, that idea of responsibility as well, and again, that sort of self-censoring thing that, you know, that might come in with writing poems. I mean, that seems to be an interesting idea. You know, having these two things running in parallel, as well as the translations, just all of these lives at once. But I mean, do you ever mix? Do you have to move between, or do you have isolated periods?
No, I think I don't. I mean, I think everything is disorder. Everything is simultaneous. The things take different lengths of time, and I think the poem is always the sort of quickest unit of production, and a book review takes longer, and a translation takes a little longer. Yeah. So, you know, these are things that happen in days, and then weeks, and then months with the case of translated books. But I don't know. In some way, you know, we're all part of one another, and I think. You know, Lowell says, one life, one writing, and I like that idea.
No, I think, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And just to go back to that idea of, you know, your phrase, that responsible, that you used in the thing about the essays. In some way, you've described your poems a few times, and this idea of there being not straightforward, or there being devious almost. I mean, is there a? Do you feel there's more license in one form or the other to be devious and not straightforward, or do you feel it's part of the same project? I suppose that's circling back to that one life and art question, really. You know, do you feel you're a different voice?
Probably a little. I mean, I think poetry is the home of my deviousness. That's probably true. Which I have, and that's probably because it's the most sort of English thing I do, and in which being English is most important in the poems. Yeah. And I sort of noticed that when I had good fortune to have poems of mine translated into German, and there are so many places where the translator went, as I saw it, wrong, because the poems were deliberately full of false trails. But I think that's in a way that's bound to happen. I'm just going to review the new film about Gerhard Richter, the painter. And it's all, I mean, in a way, the artist is bound to do that, to defend himself, because otherwise you are undefended in this world, and more undefended even than you were 50 years ago. So if he has a painting and he calls it "Nude Descending a Staircase," and there's a form of concealment in that, and a form of sort of, you know, a form of distraction, diversion. You know, It's really, you have to. It's life saving to do that, really. Even though I love the idea of being straightforward and you know, uncomplicated. But in some ways, you know, you have to make shapes to preserve yourself, something like that.
And you were never tempted to translate your own poems into German?
I would always have had the sort of cup very much less than half full. Yeah. I think I had. I mean, even my very first published poem called "Tea for My Father," which I tried to translate. I spent probably weeks trying to do it, and I always hated it. German is longer. The individual words are longer. It needs more constructions. I was told by my translator that English has these participles or these verbal nouns, and they kind of expedite everything. And speed is really important, because if you're sort of fussy or dandyish or whatever it is, as I am, then, you know, the least thing you can do is at least be quick about it. So that it's important to have some kind of balance in that.
Sure.
And if, you know, and in German the things look very fussy and rather slow, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
Difficult.
And that reminds me of something you said in a recent piece you wrote for the NYRB about the Brecht poems, and you said something about the, I can't remember the exact phrase, but something like the gravy browning. I wondered if that's in the same field, that sense of, was that to do with, I guess, the sort of, I'm writing a poem and ceremony feel of a lot of...
Again, that's probably something that should have gone in a poem. I had so much trouble protecting that phrase. Nobody in America seems to know what gravy browning is. But I was talking about, if I remember, something about the reader being attached to something kind of old-fashioned in poetry, and I mean, sort of like fake velvet or something, and that there is something just too sort of too Scandinavian or something, just too much fresh air, too much sort of nice light wood about Brecht, and the English, maybe specifically the British reader, prefers things to be a little bit murky, and that's this phrase I thought of, the gravy browning, which is something of apparently of no nutritious consequence at all, but it's also the name of one of the many Victorian poets I haven't read.
I think it's a character in Toast as well.
It's related to, I think, somebody called smoking browning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, smoking browning.
He fought in the 30s, I think. I think John's looking slightly panicked, so perhaps you could read Idyll before he gestures us away.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for coaxing me through this book. I would not have... I don't know.
Oh, you did the heavy
lifting. I flicked it.
You had to write it.
Would have flipped through it. Idyll. The windows will reflect harder, blacker than before, and fresh cracks will appear in the yellow brick. There is no milkman or paper boy, but presumably the lurid pizza flyers and brassy offers of loans will continue to drop through the letterbox. The utilities will be turned off one by one as the standing orders keel over or lose their address, though there was never that much cooking or bathing or phoning went on here anyway. The fridge will stop its buzz, the boiler its spontaneous combusting, till there is nothing but a mustiness of gas. The dust will coil and thicken ultimately to hawsers around pipes and wires. Ever more elaborate spiders' webs will sheet off the corners. Rust stains and mildew and rot will spread chromatically below the holes in the roof, radiate from the radiators. Eventually, mosses and small grasses and even admirable wildflowers, hell and elder or buddleia, push their heads through the chinks between the boards. A useless volume of books, who could ever read that many, will keep the moths entertained. Generations of industrious woodlice and silverfish will leave their corpses on the clarty work surfaces, and a pigeon or two will hook its feet over the tarnished sink and brood vacantly over its queenly pink toes.
I'm looking to John as if something's going to happen.
Come on, boys, if you've got a question.
Okay.
Do you want a
glass
of water?
I guess I was wondering what it's like to write Hofmann poetry in 2017, 2018, whatever. How has technological advances changed the way you write?
I was stuck for a long time because I didn't want to stop using my typewriter, and I can remember I'd written something. I've never owned a printer. I still don't own a printer. And I wanted to send a poem to somewhere, or work on a poem or something. And I had written it down in a computer, and I copied it. I typed it out on my typewriter to have a copy of this thing, and then I mailed it off or crossed out bits. Really under extreme protest. It's such a difference between. I mean, there is, nasty phrase really, muscle memory. It's more kind of bone memory really that you have from typing, and It's far too easy. It's far too easy to make things appear and make things look nice and make things look like type. I love the violence associated with typing is really important, but I don't have it in me to type anymore. And I've been seduced by these sort of soft machines, to coin a phrase. But I mean, there are things that will now write what you say, which is again something of no interest to me at all. But yeah, good luck.
I was going to ask, what's next for Michael Hofmann?
Well, so I have a translation is published tomorrow. By Hans Fallada, Little Man, What Now? The book from the 30s.
We've got it already. It's on the
Have you?
If anyone wants it.
Great. What, are you allowed to sell it already? You kind of post.
We'll do it on the Slack.
Post date.
We'll do it on the Slack.
Post date it. So that's coming out tomorrow. I'm writing about this film. I'm going back to Florida on Saturday, and it's a sort of the month from hell with applications and thesis defences, both in the same idiotic shortest month. I have sort of translations that I'm going to revise. I have something to write about basilids, Georg Basilids, painter. I have a couple of translations to revise. There's more things than I can remember.
Do you feel under greater pressure dealing with the more popular classics? For example, Berlin Alexanderplatz and Radetzky March than perhaps some of the less well-known works?
No, I mean, I think largely to do with the state of German and my dislike of sort of contemporary spoken German and what many German novelists now write, which is very influenced by Anglo-American literature and is is sort of written to be filmed or written for television and is sort of all dialogue and so on. And I sort of have a hankering for written books and written sentences and descriptive passages and kind of old-fashioned stuff like that. So I quite quickly, but completely accidentally, which is typical of me, I wound up in the 20s and 30s, which are actually, I think, the most progressive decade there's been. I think that the 20s are kind of ahead of us. I mean, the period of modernism and so forth. And they are. Anyway, so I sort of wound up there, and they speed had begun in literature. I mean, the films were made, and these were the sort of the first books that were like Dublin were influenced by cinematic technique, and I love Roth because his books go so fast. I mean, even with descriptive passages, you have 120 pages, and you have weddings, suicides, murders, emigration, just full of incident, but at the same time with a feeling of contemplation and understanding and of something beautiful having been written as well. And I think that's made it difficult for me to translate much contemporary literature.
You've had the frame as being going away and coming back, and we've got you back kind of thing. Have you been away from yourself?
I've been away from myself. Yeah, I mean, maybe this whole life was sort of encumbered with teaching, with translating, or something like that. I sort of feel like there is something sort of comet-like about it or something. Perhaps it is a thought. At the same time, I'm still my sort of sort of scruffy studenty self who wears old clothes and lies around most of the time. So I haven't betrayed myself. I haven't sort of sharpened up, and I haven't moved with the times. Perhaps I've offered myself too many distractions or something. But I've always really believed in taking things as they come, as they offer, and not. There's something that I think Cézanne said, which is "Il faut décourager les arts." It's important to discourage the arts, and I take that very personally to do with not making it too easy for myself to write poems, so I don't sort of privilege, horrible word, privilege my poems over other things. And if it is a fact if somebody wants a piece, wants me to write about something or someone, then that becomes important. And I think it's it's a form of sort of citizenship or something, doing what people want.
So there's the part of the being a poet which isn't about writing.
But which I think probably is, this is my conversation with Jeremy Harding. Probably it survives, or there's something sort of ineradicable about it. You can't sort of kill it. I mean, I try and kill it, but it's somewhere very very deep inside you, and it's your own water on your own mill, and that's your in some ways that's the most sort of perfect and the most perfect sort of ecology you can have. But I mean, in other ways, though, I am attracted by the idea of service. I am attracted by required writing, by making German books available for people who haven't learned German.
You've written a lot about Robert Lowell over the years and selected his poetry. Has the way you've felt about him or your relationship to him changed over the years, do you think, as you've written more yourself?
Yeah, thank you. A little bit. I think I think the very first time, when I wrote about Ian Hamilton's biography, so this would have been in 1985, I think, there was a line of Montale that I knew and used. Troppo, I don't know. Troppo vite occorrono per farne una. Too many lives are needed to make one. And I had that sense that Lowell took the lives of those around him and was made possible largely by Elizabeth Hardwicke, but also by children, by first wives, by other people, by colleagues. And there seemed to be something sort of exorbitant about that as an enterprise, and that perhaps I sort of feel the sort of the wickedness of that more than the sort of the splendor of that now. And I particularly when I was sort of thinking about writing about the exchange of letters between Lowell and Bishop, I did find my sympathies were much more with Bishop, and Lowell seemed someone of narrow culture and a sort of a verbal maniac and somebody who with poor sense. I mean, I like the idea of poets that have a little bit like Louis MacNeice's thing. I would have a poet, able-bodied, blah blah blah. Poets generally with sensitive apparatus, and I think Lowell is not that. Lowell is a brute, but he's also there's also something very sort of feline and weightless. I mean, he's the most unsubtle person you could imagine, but he became subtle, or he taught himself subtlety in some way that I don't understand how that happens, but he did not begin subtly. So that's sort of changed, I think, and I sort of slightly shifted. I mean, when I came across Schuyler, James Schuyler, I thought, I wonder if I don't actually even prefer this to Lowell, even though that seemed kind of heresy. So I think there's a little movement. Thank you.
You mentioned water a couple of times. Water being a fuel, I think, earlier on.
Yes.
And
yeah.
You also mentioned air in sort of a Scandinavian sense, too much air in poetry. I'm just wondering how you think about the elements, if you talk about fire, earth, water and air, and how they sort of combine into the creative process.
Never thought about it particularly. I mean, I think the elemental poet for me is Heaney, who begins as the poet of earth and water, and became certainly the poet of air, fire, possibly not. I don't know. I hadn't sort of approached myself along those lines. I mean, I would. I don't even know which I suppose my element must be sort of. I don't know. I don't even know. I mean, I think one perhaps doesn't know that about oneself. I mean, I think it's for others to say. Obviously, I'm sort of. I mean, you get 2 scoops, don't you? You get one of. So I think probably I'm earth and fire, but I mean I like the sound of water and air too.
I just wondered if you had a particular reader or readers of your poems before you send them out. Do you show them to anyone?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that's. I mean, my father was a novelist, and his example is that we are self-sufficient. We are things leave us when they're ready, when they're finished. And I've very, very slight exceptions don't show things to people. I mean, the people are the editors who and they, what they say matters more than what a friend might say or a friendly reader might say. Otherwise, I'd always thought, my father never lived in centres, and things were always done by mail, and the manuscripts would go out by mail, and the books would come in by mail. And I think I remember being really terrified when I moved to London, because at that time, at that point, the thing became social, whereas previously it was covert. I mean, it was private, and nobody, it wasn't sort of contaminated, or didn't risk contamination by having a bad complexion or what do I know, coming late, or what do I know, so those sort of contingencies. And beyond that, my reader has always been, I've said, somebody I will never meet, who gets it, and either now or I would hope, this is the sort of the hope and the sort of the gamble of literature, or it used to be, when I'm gone.
I think we're done.
I said it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Equal business.